And welcome back to Agriculture Today. I'm Charles C. Craig. Fall is upon us now, and one of the most significant things that takes place for cattle producers is weaning spring-born calves. We have with us now a K-State Beef Systems specialist, Justin Waggoner, and he is here to discuss some management tips to help keep weaning less stressful. Justin, let's first talk about why weaning is stressful on calves.
Well, I think weaning time is something that all producers kind of view to be stressful on calves. And if you look at just making that essentially kind of that transition from being with the cow on grass to probably coming into most likely some sort of a dry lot environment, eating different feedstuffs out of a bunk, those are a lot of changes that we're going to potentially throw at a calf in what I would call a relatively short amount of time. And so I think that in itself can make it stressful, but I would also argue that it probably doesn't have to be as stressful if we maybe take into account some additional steps to reduce the amount of new things that we're beginning to expose those calves to.
Right, and some additional things is maybe having some management practices that producers should keep in mind. So let's go over some of those. First off, let's go over establishing a herd health program.
Well, I think one of the things with weaning and cow herd management starts well before we actually begin to wean those calves. And having a vaccination plan on the cows, ensures that the calves are really set up for success when we get passive transfer of those antibodies into the calves. To me, that's one of the first things we can do to really begin to prepare our herd and the calves for those future maybe disease challenges that they may come across later on in life. And just gives them a really good start by making sure we've got a good herd health program on the cows.
Right, and that obviously lowers stress. So is there some additional stresses that producers shouldn't do?
Yeah, well, if we think about, don't see a lot of horned cattle anymore, but if we do, castration, dehorning, maybe even branding in some regions of the country, those are all stressors that if we do all those things or compound them onto that short amount of time and couple them with weaning, we've really just added a lot to it. So one of the things I tell folks is really it's best if we can do some of those practices well in advance of weaning, at least 3 weeks. It just allows those time for those calves to kind of get over any of those other things that we've maybe brought into the mix, such as castration. Get those done well in advance of weaning, so we're really just maybe adjusting the calves to the new environment and those type of things.
Mm-hmm. And there's research indicating that allowing fence line contact between cows and calves for 7 days after separation reduces behavioral stress and minimizes post-weaning weight. Is that correct?
That's correct. This is another one of basically what I call it is the kind of a soft wean scenario versus kind of the traditional hard wean, abrupt maternal separation. Put the calves in the trailer and move them to a different location. Simply if facilities allow for it, simply allowing fence line contact between the cows and the calves. 7 days was evaluated in the research study, I believe, but even for just a few days really kind of helps those calves transition, I think. The difficult part about it, what you'll run into is those cows are really pretty good at getting back in with those calves. A lot of times I say weaning is oftentimes more stressful on the cows than it is the calves. We'll see the calves that have been acclimated to the feed come up and eat out of the bunk, and the cows are the ones pacing on the outside of the fence. So, fence line weaning, kind of that soft wean scenario, is one of the ways that we can reduce stress. However, I will kind of also say that, if we take some additional measures that we've talked about earlier, I think we can do a traditional hard wean on some calves as well and get along very well.
At the K-State Agriculture Research Center, a new feeding management protocol for weaning calves has been developed. Can you discuss that a little bit more?
Sure. Well, one of the areas that we've been working on is really just weaning protocols, early weaning studies, and through that research over the past several years with my colleagues John Yeager, Casey Olson, and Twig Marson before that, we needed to standardize kind of our feeding management on these weaned calves, and so we really came up with kind of a system. We fed a lot of different diets over the course of the years, but the way we feed our weaned calves has really been the same. And there's a couple things we have to understand about a newly weaned calf. One, simply because of the stresses that they've gone through, the acclimation of the new feedstuffs, etc. Typically, feed intake of those calves when they first come into the pen or we first wean them is going to be low. A lot of times it's in the neighborhood of 1 to 1.5% of their body weight on a dry matter basis. That's not a lot of dry feed. If we've got a 500-pound calf, that's only 5 pounds of feed. So we have to have a diet that's pretty nutrient dense for one thing. We've also got to keep in mind that some of the feed stuffs that these calves are most accustomed to eating, probably a grass hay, aren't necessarily nutrient dense. They may not be able to. If that was all that calf was consuming, they're certainly not going to be able to meet their nutrient requirements, which are relatively high being a small calf. Mm-hmm. So what we've kind of developed there is we start off on the first day we bring the calves in. We essentially offer them 0.5% of their body weight as kind of our weaning diet, and then 0.5% of their body weight on a dry basis as a pretty high quality grass hay. And with that, we put the ration on in the bottom of the bunk, and the hay goes on top. And really what we're using the hay for, because those calves are accustomed to probably eating that, it's kind of to draw them up to the bunk. Mm-hmm. And so once we kind of get them on that, we gradually increase it to by about 0.2% per body weight on the ration per day, out to about day 6 or 7. Really our goal is to move those calves from that 0.5% of body weight of that dry ration upward to somewhere around 2%, maybe 2.2% of their body weight by day 7 to 10 out there. And so we're going to make stepwise adjustments as we go through this. We'll keep the hay at a constant 0.5% of body weight out to about day 6. Typically at about day 4, what we'll do is we actually begin to put the hay on the bottom of the bunk and the ration on top. The thought being is then the calves have to eat that ration that we're trying to transition them to get to the hay that they're really kind of looking for in the bottom of the bunk. And so, it's really worked really well. I think one of the problems a lot of guys run into weaning calves is about day 3 or 4, those calves have kind of gotten over the initial stress of maternal separation, mm-hmm. and typically they become a little more aggressive at the bunk. And as cattlemen, what we tend to do is, we've got to put more feed in front of them. And one of the nice things about this program is it really kind of balances keeping those calves aggressive. If we increase the amount of feed when those calves are being a bit more aggressive, a lot of times what happens is they'll tend to overeat. And when they do that, then the next day the consumption begins to drop off. And so what we found with this protocol is it keeps those calves relatively aggressive, coming to the bunk, and we don't really run into those fluctuations in intake that can be caused by overfeeding about day 3 or 4 in the program.
Mm-hmm. Justin, if listeners could take one thing out of this interview, what would you want it to be?
Well, I think first and foremost, we all perceive weaning to be kind of a stressful time for both the calves and I think for us on the producer side. But I don't think it has to be. A lot of times, we just kind of approach weaning with let's get it over with attitude. Yeah. It's going to be stressful. Let's just get it out of the way. And I found in a lot of situations, start to ask yourself, well, how well am I preparing these calves to make this transition to this new part of their life? Being, they're going to go from a diet that's essentially mother's milk and dry grass to a ration that's going to be delivered in a bunk every day or some sort of supplement on grass. Are there ways that I can begin to, within the context of an operation, start to prepare that calf maybe a couple of weeks in advance to begin to make that transition? And really it's, those initial things can really, especially with health, can impact that calf all the way through the finishing periods. It is important to kind of spend a little time preparing that calf to make that transition to the next phase of the beef production sector.
Well, thanks, Justin.
Sure.
That was a K-State Beef System specialist, Justin Waggoner, talking about some preparation for weaning spring-born calves. I'm Charles C. Craig for Agriculture Today.